Museum Director, Mr. Michael Rebman from the Artesia Historical Museum and Arts Center. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Happy Thursday to you, and we'll get our discussion rolling here. Last week, you spent a little bit of time talking about Westerns based on historical events or times or periods, and talking about whether or not how accurate they were and how people's remembrances of history are probably affected by some of these things. And you wanted to continue that today, and you wanted to stay in the world of Westerns, right?
Yes. Last week I watched the movie Chisholm and gave my thoughts about it. This week I thought I'd watch Young Guns, the one starring Emilio Estevez, and give my thoughts about that.
Okay. Yeah, that was a 1988 movie, and it was very, very popular at the time.
Yes, and unfortunately I could not find a copy of it this week. So instead I watched Billy the Kid versus Dracula.
Okay. By the way, according to the International Movie Database, if you have Freevee, you can watch Young Guns for free.
Oh, well, I don't have that.
And
so
Freevee is the rebranded Free Movies on International Movie Database, which is owned by Amazon. So if you have a Amazon account, then you've got Freevee, and Freevee is where you can watch some movies like that. So, but anyway, you watched one with vampires, or what was it called again?
Billy the Kid versus Dracula. Usually when I watch these movies, I go to like those questionable movie uploading websites from Eastern Europe. So luckily I managed to find this one in English.
Okay.
And it's definitely a bizarre Western. Came out in 1966. And you can tell just from the title that there are significant issues, but the way they treated Billy the Kid is, in its own way, typical of Westerns. So Westerns, the Western genre of movies, those are, of course, based around the idea that it's set in the West, and during the era of the Hays Code, it's a movie genre where there's a lead character, a lead actor, a lead actress who's, the sort of big character, like John Wayne. Mm-hmm. And you set up the hero, who could be of any sort of honorable sort of profession, like a rancher, someone who works on a cattle drive. It could be an army officer, a sheriff, anything of that nature. Then you set up the bad guy. Mm-hmm. Then you set up the drama. Then you have the big finish that's full of explosions and violence, and then the movie ends with the hero riding off into the sunset. Chisholm did precisely that, and so did Billy the Kid versus Dracula. Of course, you had Billy the Kid was the hero, which is absurd, but appropriate for 1966, because they're still operating by the Hays Code, which said that you can't have villains as heroes. You can't idolize bad people. Of course, the bad guy is, well, he wasn't Dracula, so that's an inappropriate misnaming of the title, because he was Mr. Underhill, as played by John Carradine, but that was a name that he stole from someone else, so he never actually had a name. He was just a vampire. The big finish was them fighting in a cave over trying to save a victim from Dracula, and then Billy the Kid rides off into the sunset.
Does he get the girl in the end in this one, or no? Sometimes that's an angle in these movies too.
Oh, definitely. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it was when you look further, it's the vampire. His victims were all young women, sort of like that proto-exploitation genre. And his last victim was, in fact, Billy the Kid's fiancée. And here's where it really fits into that sort of Hollywood Western genre, despite it being a really low-budget B, C, or even D-list movie. Billy the Kid was not a kid in the movie. He was an adult. He was in his late 20s. He was the foreman of a ranch. And his fiancée was the ranch owner's daughter.
Mm.
And the drama was that Dracula had selected her to be his undead bride. So they're fighting over the same person.
Right. Now, in the movie Dracula, what you mentioned what the movie has Billy the Kid doing. What is Dracula doing? What's his cover story in this movie?
He's a random unnamed person who showed up at a stagecoach stop one day, got on the stagecoach, didn't give a name or anything like that. He would fly around as a bat at night, find his victims. What's interesting, though, is that they did something that was, typical Hollywood, but either showed it as just being Hollywood trying to fit in all those paint-by-number sort of scenes, or maybe they had subtly done some research, but there's a scene close to the beginning where he gets off the stage at a stage stop. He goes to a Native American village, finds a victim there, kills her. They find the victim. They get angry, of course, because, a young lady was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
They immediately assume it was on the stagecoach, so the person who did it was on the stagecoach, which they were right.
Right.
In a way. So they chase after the stagecoach after it leaves, and then they kill everybody on the stagecoach. Which, that's sort of a, paint-by-numbers Hollywood vision of Native Americans, but there's a little bit of a factual basis to that, in that in certain areas of the West, there is a very strong sense of retributive justice, which you would see in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where this movie was based in. It could be Arizona. Probably was. It was filmed in California.
Right.
But in, New Mexico, for example, there's a lot of retributive justice, where if someone does you harm, you go and repay the harm, and you repay an extra in hopes that whoever did it, whoever hurt you, will never do it again.
Right.
And you saw that, for example, there was a stagecoach, or, a wagon train, not a stagecoach, in the 1850s, if I remember correctly, 1853, the White family, they're traveling out to New Mexico. A couple weeks before that, the Hickory Apache, a small band, had went up to Las Vegas to trade there. It was a full band with families, kids, women, children, all that. And they wanted to trade. This was still before Fort Union was built, so the Army outpost at Las Vegas was unhappy with their presence and chased them away, shot at them, killed a few, captured some women and children as prisoners, and scared the rest of them away. And so in response, that specific band went out to the Santa Fe Trail, found the first wagon that they could find, attacked it, carried off the women as prisoners, killed all the men, just as the Army had done to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's retributive justice.
Right, right.
But an eye for an eye makes the world blind, so that's why the West was so violent, because people kept on escalating.
Right.
That eventually led to the Army going after them in a long campaign of violence and fighting. But that's something I noticed in that movie. Another thing I noticed is that Billy the Kid, he's an adult. He's played by an actor who's 27.
Mm-hmm.
But he received little respect from his employees. And in fact, a couple occasions where they drew revolvers at each other, but no one fired. One point, one of his employees is so angry at him that the employee gets off his horse, punches Billy the Kid, just punches him so hard he goes flying onto the ground, and starts just beating on him while he's on the ground, picking him up, throwing him, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That, of course, is, pretty silly, and later on in the movie, Billy the Kid eventually shoots that guy and kills him. But in actuality, Billy the Kid did have a few incidents where he was a kid trying to hang out with adults, and adults would just beat him up to chase him away. Like at the beginning of the Lincoln County Wars, he was trying to get in with the Evans gang because he was an outlaw from Arizona, so he figured he could join in with any sort of cattle rustling operation that he could.
Right.
And one of the adults in the Evans gang just started punching him and kicking him and yelling at him to go away.
Right.
After a while. Same thing happened in Arizona beforehand, and he shot the guy. That's why partly why he became an outlaw on the run.
Sure.
So maybe the person who wrote the script for the movie had actually done their research on Billy the Kid and incorporated things like that into Billy the Kid's adulthood, which would be an interesting thought. Or maybe it was just another paint by the numbers, have to include added drama, because that guy who attacked Billy the Kid was also a former boyfriend for the ranch owner's daughter, or something of that nature. He wanted to date her.
Right. Well, it was 1966 and a low budget deal, probably trying to play on two themes that may have been popular amongst a certain moviegoer. Let's put Billy the Kid up against Dracula and see what kind of a screenplay we can write from this, or movie we can make from this.
Oh, definitely, because that same director, at the same time, he was doing a 2-for-1 filming in order to save money. So he also did I think it was Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter. That one was set in Mexico, and that was Jesse James, the famous outlaw, going down to Mexico to try to stay safe, and Frankenstein's daughter was there trying to reanimate dead bodies.
Well,
but that...
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That one is a completely different tone, though, and that kind of signified a shift in Hollywood's views of Westerns. Because Billy the Kid, in the Billy the Kid movie, was a reformed adult who was trying to do things right, didn't want to shoot people, didn't want to be the impulsive teenager that he really was before he was eventually shot while resisting arrest. Whereas Jesse James was an actual outlaw, was a bad guy, but portrayed in a positive light.
Different how they write these. I was looking at one of the trivias on this Billy the Kid movie. Virginia Christine is in the movie. She plays Eva Oster. Most people probably recognize her as Mrs. Olson in the coffee commercials. And it says here in the continuity goofs, several times Mrs. Oster is called Mrs. Olson because that's the character she played in the Folgers coffee commercials. And they just left it in. They didn't go back and redo the take or do anything about that. Oh, that must have been a interesting time to film movies like that. We'll be interested to see what other westerns you kind of dig up that kind of fit that genre or fit that style. I'm sure there's a bunch out there.
There are, and in fact, that was the predominant style of Western up until the 60s. And the change came about in part because different parts of the world were doing their own takes on Westerns. And they were changing how Westerns were approached. So, for example, in the United States, before the Hays Code, there was some variety in how westerns were done. All kind of goofy, but especially with costuming. But they weren't afraid to show villains in positive lights. They were willing to blur the line between the hero and the outlaw. And then that changed. And for the most part, you didn't really see any sort of creative approaches like that, except for like the Oxbow incident in 1944. But it wasn't until the 60s that you started seeing competition and people trying to challenge the classic Western, the John Wayne Western. And in fact, the people who challenged it were like the spaghetti Westerns, as they're called, where the hero isn't the hero, the villain isn't the villain, and everybody is just, they're complex people, like the man with no name appearing in movies like For a Fistful of Dollars.
Right.
There's no hero in that movie, there's no villain. But another interesting genre that came about was the Eastern European Western, which seems kind of strange to think about, that in the middle of the Cold War, East Germany was churning out dozens of Westerns.
Huh. American Westerns?
Yes.
Interesting.
And I think I might need to devote that for another radio program, because I watched one of them, and it's and you see multiple different ideas going into that one film. It's a Western, but it's also Soviet propaganda. But it's also that sort of spaghetti Western style movie where there's no clear villains or heroes. But at the same time, getting back to that Soviet propaganda, they do clearly have heroes and villains. It's complex.
Yeah, kind of an interesting deal. Well, we got about a minute left. What's the good word about what's going on?
Well, the Fashionable Founding Fathers exhibit is still up until the end of September. You can see that at the museum. Stop by the Ward House first, the old house with the River Rock exterior, then come over to the Art Center to look at it. We are open 10 to 1, 2 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday.
Excellent. And I hopefully that's been well attended and people get interested or have found some interest in that. And that'll be on through the end of next month, right?
Yes.
End of September. So, well, very good. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time, and always look forward to our chat. And we'll see what we need to do for next week.
Yeah, for next week, I will either watch Young Guns or I'll talk about those East German Westerns. That's fascinating.
That's true. Very good. Looking forward to it. All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you.
And that's it for the